Family Virtual Learning Series with the Cato College of Education. My name is Kristen Beach. I'm an Associate Professor of Special Education at UNC Charlotte, and I am so honored to moderate this panel today. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So just give me one moment to do that. Alrighty. So we are, again, the Family Virtual Learning Series, and this is the second night in a series of 4 learning series with the College of Education. And again, let me just say too, thank you to the Alumni Association for sponsoring this series and doing everything behind the scenes to make it happen. And I also want to thank Missy Hathcock, who is on the call today, for helping put together this awesome panel of panelists who we have for you today. As I mentioned, I'm Kristen Beach, and we have 5 panelists with varied backgrounds, and also many of whom are parents. Some are parents of children with disabilities. And so I'm going to give the mic over to our panelists for a moment and let them introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Erin Washburn.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Beach. My name is Erin Washburn, and I'm an Associate Professor of Reading in Elementary Education. And I am a parent to 2 boys. I have a 5th grader and an 8th grader, and they are both doing virtual schooling. And I'm married to a high school teacher who is also doing virtual schooling. So there's a lot of virtual learning happening in my house.
Perfect. I think we're just going down that list. So I will go next. I'm Sam Gesel. I'm an assistant professor of special education. So I'm in the Department of Special Ed and Child Development. I do not have any kiddos of my own, but I've had my hands in the mix of providing reading assessment and reading intervention via Zoom. So I'm really honored to be part of this panel and talk with y'all.
Hi there, I'm Virginia Walker. I'm an associate professor also in the Department of Special Education and Child Development. And I have been working closely with some teams this semester looking at, I'm sorry, my dog is barking. Would someone like, Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself while I tend to this? Thank you, sorry.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Ashley Anderson. I am a current EC teacher. I have a separate self-contained classroom, so I'm coming from that perspective. I'm also an alumni and a first-year doctoral student in the Department of Special Education. So.
And Tom?
I guess we'll go back to me until Virginia comes back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Tom Fisher, and I'm actually a clinical assistant professor in the middle secondary department at UNC Charlotte, but I am the parent on this panel of a child that's on the spectrum. So hopefully we don't get interrupted by he and his brother who are playing Super Smash Brothers. So hopefully we don't hear that, because I'm not really on campus.
And I'll take a moment while we're waiting for Virginia, just to, many of you who joined at the very beginning of the session probably got a little pop-up and heard a voice say that the session is being recorded. We are recording this session today. And after the session, you'll also receive a survey where we hope you will provide your feedback on the session for us. You'll also get a copy of the slide deck in PDF format and a copy of the recording. And here is Dr. Virginia Walker, so go ahead.
Hey there, sorry about that. The perks of working from home, right? So I'm Virginia Walker, again, associate professor in the Department of Special Ed and Child Development. I don't have any children, but I am working very closely with some teams this semester looking at how we can promote more inclusive experiences for students with disabilities as they're engaging with online instruction. So glad to be here.
So thank you so much to the panelists, and again for Misty for doing the tight organization of this panel tonight. So the Family Virtual Learning Series, just for a little bit of a background, the purpose of this series is to provide parents of PK to 12 students tips and strategies for supporting them in remote learning. And while we're here, from many parent perspectives, but also academic perspectives, teachers' perspectives, educator perspectives, we do want to just recognize and honor that the parent is the child's first teacher, in some cases the child's first speech pathologist or interventionist, behavior interventionist, and that the home and the community is the child's first classroom. And so while we're here to offer tips and strategies based on our experience and expertise in the area, we also want to honor and lift up the knowledge that you all have in the audience. And so you'll see in a second that we'll invite you to share out questions or comments or tips throughout the presentation as you feel like you'd like to. So our learning goals here tonight are to develop a shared understanding of needs of families, needs of parents, and needs, of course, of the children who are learning from home, and particularly for this panel, the children with disabilities. We hope that you'll learn some tips, tools, and maybe have access to some new resources that will support you as you support your child in at-home learning. And we hope that you leave tonight feeling equipped to support your child's success and feeling positive and confident about moving forward. So in a moment, I'm going to give an overview of what you can expect for tonight. We're going to have some panelists sharing. We're going to share some resources with you all, and then we'll have some time for reflection and wrap up at the end. First, you know a little bit about us, but we would like to know from you all who is in the room. This helps us tailor our discussion and just understand who we're here talking with tonight. And so everyone should have access to a chat box. If you don't see it automatically, sometimes when you hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, or if you're on your phone, you might see, or an iPad or something like that, you might see an icon that is like a little chat bubble. It's a chat box, and in that chat box, you can type in, if you would, just your role. That way we have a good idea of who's in the meeting tonight. So I see some parents and educator, faculty members, thanks for joining us. Teacher of students with learning barriers, resource teacher, another EC teacher. So it seems like we've got a pretty good mix of parents and teachers and higher education faculty. I'll just give it another minute to see if anyone else wants to share. Another parent and direct care support provider. Wonderful. So we're so happy to have all of you with us, whether you're a parent or other service provider, an educator, a higher educator. We hope that with all of our collective knowledge in the room, audience members included, not just the panelists, we can all walk away with some real great tips and learnings tonight. So now that we know who is in the room, we also, in a moment, are going to pull you on topics of interest, because we recognize that there's multiple different ways that at-home learning can look and can impact families differently. Every family has different needs, and so we want to see what the hottest topics are in this room tonight, so that we can focus our attention there. And then that will be followed by a discussion and sharing of our tips, and hopefully an interactive discussion with you all as the audience members. And towards that end, if you have questions or if you want to share anything at all at any time, please feel free to just unmute your mic and butt in if you need to. Use the chat box. You can also use, there's some tools, if you're familiar with Zoom at the bottom, little emotions where you can raise your hand, and I'll try and monitor our little pictures, and I can see that your hand is raised, and I can call on you as well if you would like to enter a conversation that way. But we are very happy to hear your voice in this conversation as well. We hope that this will be an interactive conversation. So here's our topic. So we do want to hear from you about what is most pressing, what are your most pressing needs and questions and areas of interest right now. We recognize that there are many areas that can be potentially difficult or problematic in at-home learning, especially when we're working with children with disabilities. And communication is one major area. Communication between the parent and the child's teacher, communication with the school, understanding the different kinds of communication that comes from the school could be potentially a barrier to providing strong support to your child. There also might be questions around collaboration. How do I collaborate with my teachers? How do I collaborate with families? How do I help my child collaborate with other peers to support their learning? Perhaps there's questions around how to advocate for your child's needs. If your child has particular equipment that they need to use at home, or special services related to their IEP, how to advocate to make sure that those are provided. And also, as a parent, advocating for your own needs. Perhaps you have a need in training for using some equipment that your child uses at school, but that you're not familiar with. So maybe some speech tools, or any other needs that you might have. We also recognize that the virtual learning environment is new for most people. And so perhaps you have questions about how to set up a virtual learning environment at home that's conducive to learning and supportive for your child. Perhaps there's questions around how to support the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of your child, how to connect them to peers, how to make them feel well supported, and how to promote positive behaviors at home. There may be questions related to providing and supporting academic instruction, understanding requests that come through the teachers, understanding synchronous and asynchronous instruction, and also assessment. How does assessment work when we're working virtually? You might have questions around that. How is my child's progress being monitored? How is that information being used to inform instruction? And last, you might have questions around technology and tech support, navigating learning platforms, using learning tools like Zoom, teaching your child to use learning tools like Zoom, use of hardware and software and websites, and navigation of websites and links, and all sorts of things would fall into that category. So there's a lot of topics here, and just to make it a little bit easier for you all to share with us what your interest is in, we consolidated these topics into 4 broad categories. Category A is collaboration and advocacy. Category B is learning environment and social, emotional, behavioral supports. Learning environment C is instruction and assessment. And learning environment D has to do with technology, navigation, expectations, and prioritization of tasks that your child is required to do. So what we want to know, and there may be other things that we did not list that is like just a burning question right now. What we want to know is, of these 4 categories, or perhaps you would like to type in a new category, where are you most in need of support? What do you most want to talk about tonight? What do you most hope to learn about tonight? And so if you could just type in A, B, C, D, or a new category in the chat box, that would be helpful. I already see some responses coming up. Thank you. So right now I've got 3.5 C's to 1.5 B's. So I'm just going to give it another moment to see if anyone else wants to go ahead and put in. So the EC process with testing while still virtual. So I'm going to go ahead and call that a category C under assessment and instruction. And testing. Okay, great. Do it maybe one more couple of seconds. Okay, so it seems like the consensus right now are the most pressing areas of need have to do with the area of instruction and assessment, followed by the learning environment and social emotional behavior support. So that's where we'll spend most of our time tonight, but we will talk about collaboration and advocacy and technology as well. And what we found what the panel members found as they were putting together this presentation for you today is these topics really do kind of bleed across one another. So as we're talking about one topic, we're really going to get into other topics as well. And I think that's definitely okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start on this instruction and assessment component. And once I go there, if our panelists would feel free to just jump in when you see something on that slide that you want to speak to, we can start with an open discussion of tips there. And then also what I would like to do, so let me just go ahead and go there, is say that when we were thinking about instruction and assessment, we were thinking about 3 major kind of themes: access to instruction, communication about instruction and expectations, and then the expectations for instruction in terms of time, workload, and structure. And so many of you wrote that you were interested in instruction and assessment as a topic focus for tonight. So we would like to know a little bit more deeply, maybe just looking at this slide or considering what you were already thinking when you wrote C a second ago. What are your specific questions about instruction and assessment? So you can go ahead and pop those into the chat box too. That way we can make sure that those get answered. Or you can enable your mic as well. And we can also start with the first one as people are constructing their questions from Cynthia. Cynthia, you wrote in the chat box a little bit ago that you were interested in hearing about the EC process with testing while still virtual. And so the first thing I'd like to do is get a little bit of clarification with what you mean by the EC process and testing. So what comes to mind for me is eligibility testing or reevaluation testing, but that may not be what you mean. So would you either enter in the chat box or go ahead and open up your mic and clarify your question for us? Eligibility. All right, so our first question has to do with how to go about the eligibility process with the testing piece while we are still virtual. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up that question to our panelists, and it might take a couple of moments for people to collect their thoughts, and I think that's okay too.
I can start us off by saying, and I know that this is probably a resource you're already aware that does exist, but sort of the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, as well as sort of the IDEA website, has some basic guidance about the formal assessment for special education eligibility. We are all as a country learning what this means in a virtual context. So I will start by saying that one of the biggest challenges is that these formal assessments we know have, like strong reliability, strong validity. That means that we're testing what we want to test and it's giving us good, useful information. But all of that was contingent on a face-to-face application. And so this virtual world, it's a lot less clear what that looks like. But I can give some helpful hints when I've been assessing kiddos, not in things that worked well for them in terms of supports and strategies within a virtual context that could be applied if you have this expectation that you need to do things like, say, administer the Woodcock-Johnson or things like that. The first big thing is obviously having to share screen and have a kiddo read off that screen. If you create things within Google Slides, you can use a pointer in Google Slides. Kristen, will you be able to model that? Sorry, Dr. Beach. And so down at the bottom of a Google slide, if you click the pointer option down at the very bottom, there is a way to have a laser pointer exist. And I found that that has been one of the most valuable tools when I'm assessing kiddos to make sure that they are where they need to be within that page. There are other sorts of things that just help with the administration part on the side of a teacher, but a lot of the things that I've been having to edit as a parent with assessment. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I think I'm going to pass the baton, but.
So I wonder if, okay, so if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a parent and I'm wondering about eligibility assessment, I think things that I would be concerned about is, I think what Sam had already mentioned regarding the validity of the data. So I'd be wondering, is the assessment results something that can be trusted, given that they're providing a virtual environment? If the school is doing eligibility testing through something like Zoom, as a parent, I would want to make sure a couple of things. First, that the screen that my child is reading on is large. So I definitely wouldn't use a cell phone. I'd probably not use an iPad or something like that. So the screen would be large enough, because if they are having visual stimulation, okay, so so testing is being done in person. So I would love, Cynthia, for you to, if you are comfortable, to enable your mic and give us a little bit more context around your question so that we can better answer it. I would imagine, my first thought is I imagine that if testing is being done in person in a business as usual way, the laws regarding testing and eligibility and timelines should be remaining the same. it'd probably look pretty similar. And so I'm wondering if there's particular questions within that context that you're wondering about.
So, Dr. Beach, so we did do the reeval. So it wasn't, you know, the initial testing, but we did do the reeval, and it was in person. So we did have a very specific day. It was scheduled well in advance. All the PPE was used. And, you know, of course, that was in the spring. That's when we had to do the reevaluation, was in the spring. And so there was a specific day. There was only, you know, there was only one student to, you know, a pretty good sized room and one person administering it. And then there was a parent waiting, you know, place. So that I was there because you know how long some of this testing takes. And so I had there was a parent work zone where, of course, I still had to follow the protocols and things like that, but I was allowed to be on site while this took place. And so then there was different students on different days so that it was scheduled. So, I think the options were there, but we absolutely, you know, chose to do the in-person and make sure that we were following all protocols, all sort of safety protocols.
Thanks for that context, Tom. And it sounds like we also just have an additional piece. What kind of accommodations should parents be expecting for a hybrid experience? So I'll go ahead and open that question about within hybrid instruction, what kinds of accommodations should children with disabilities be expecting? What's available? What's possible?
Do you think that's me again? I could speak to just my son's some of his accommodations. So of course he has modified assessments and work that he has to do. But one of the big things for him is his stemming. So he's like I mentioned, he's on the spectrum, and so one of the things that he needs to do is he actually needs to. So it's very, you know, every student should be able to get up and move around when they're in a virtual situation, but it's key for him. So what he does is what he refers to as his laps. So he is given time to do those laps, and all he has to do is excuse himself. So, you know, he just has to say, hey, I need to go do laps, and he's fine with sending that in the chat if he needed to do that. And so, of course, in a classroom, he's allowed to do that in the classroom or the hallway or whatever. At home, he likes to do it outside. So that's one of those things where at home, I would have to sort of monitor that because I wouldn't want the laps to last an extremely long time that he didn't necessarily get back into the, you know, the virtual classroom, as it were. But those things were well known in advance. Those are things that we definitely wanted to make sure, hey, here's the things that he has to do to sort of center himself, to sort of calm himself down and refocus. So he has to be allowed to do those things and not just be, you know, stuck sort of in that Zoom focus and all of that screen time. He definitely needs a break from that.
I can piggyback on that a little bit, and that was great. So all the students, I mean, everyone should have very similar accommodations to what they obviously receive in class, if not the same. But the challenge is with the virtual learning that those accommodations are going to look a little bit different. So they'll be the same, but they, like, you know, they may look a little different. So at the same time, so like that kind of speaks to the part about the expectations. So from a parent perspective, you know, it may be, you think that one of their accommodations is taking that break. So maybe at home, but taking that break at home from that workload that they're expected to sit and do that Zoom looks different. So it's, you know, every 3 minutes instead of every 5 minutes. You know, the lesson structure may be a little bit different because of how the lesson has to be presented. So I don't think that the accommodations are necessarily going to change. They just may like be presented in a different way. So if a student has extra time that they're allowed on the assessment, of course they're still going to have that. Just, you know, it may look a little bit different because the assessment may be different, how it's presented on Zoom or whatever, Canvas or however it's given. So that kind of speaks with that workload, that structure, and how, every student is really going to be different with their accommodations and what they are being presented. So.
Yeah, I pulled up just some examples if that might be helpful of what it could look like, but I completely agree, Ashley, that for the most part, the accommodations are going to be the same, but they might look a little bit different in terms of how they're addressed. So just a few examples. For example, if your child or your student should be receiving a recorded lessons instead of the student taking notes, for example, you could, or the educator could provide a transcript of the lesson, or they can use some sort of screen recording technology to record the lesson. If they are to receive class notes from a teacher or another student, you could do web captioning, or the teacher could provide notes before the lesson, things like that. Or even if we're on something like Zoom where there's a chat box, those sorts of notes can be provided through the chat feature. So again, they really should be the same, but there just might be differences in how they're presented.
And I would just say that the most important thing, because there will be differences in presentation, is that is going to become part of the conversation, right? So you're going to be talking about what those accommodations are. And as an IEP team, you as the parent, as well as all of the school members of that IEP team, should be identifying how special ed and related services are going to be provided, how that's going to look, how those accommodations are going to look in that face-to-face, and what that's really going to look like in a virtual context. Because I think that level of communication and pre-planning is going to help it be more successful and to make sure everyone's on that same page. And so I think just being really intentional about that planning together of that same accommodation that looks one way with face-to-face and another with virtual.
I think one thing I would want to add, and I know it goes a little bit to the social and emotional, but I mean, we as parents, we know our children. So knowing some of the things, and one of the things that definitely had to happen with my son is that he had to have the school issued like Chromebook, right? He wanted to separate what was school versus what was home. So he didn't want to use a home device that he uses for something that's fun for him, right? So knowing that he's separating those two things, and knowing this is when he's going to be serious about school stuff, and then, okay, now I get a break, I'm going to use this device, right? Or I'm just going to read a book. But knowing, what your student needs and how they operate, and then sort of trying to, merge that together in what the home environment looks like if you're having to learn from home, right? Because I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that we face, is that when he gets home from school, he needs that break. And then if school's at home, what does that look like? And him having that separation, it was really nice to have, he always wears headphones, but he wanted the school headphones. So he had school headphones and school computer, home headphones, home computer. So it made it easier for him to sort of make that transition.
Thank you all for those really excellent recommendations and just tips. And so just to summarize, what I was hearing really at first was just a recognition that the function of any accommodations should be remaining the same. So the accommodation should be serving the same function for the student, whether it's in a remote or face-to-face environment, but the form, what it looks like in practice, might look a little bit different. And that's really important to talk about in the IEP team, when you're writing the accommodations and how they're going to work in virtual format ahead of time, to make sure that's really clear and you really think deeply through what that's going to look like. And then also Virginia had provided some helpful tips around specific accommodations for virtual learning, like having recorded lessons or getting a transcript of the chat box or transcript of the lesson. Tom mentioned use of headphones, use of tools and equipment from the school to help facilitate learning and support learning. So thank you to all the panelists for that. I'd like to invite additional questions from our audience members. Cynthia says thank you. Do our audience members have, and our other participants have, additional questions related to instruction and assessment? And if not, what we can do is we can just start talking about what we have prepared on this slide. But I'll give a moment for those questions to come through the chat box. If you're in the middle of writing a question, please do finish it, and I'll see it in the chat box and we will address it. But I'll go ahead and open up on the topic of instruction assessment to our panelists on this slide. So again, we had kind of come up with themes of access, communication, and expectations. So I'd like to open it up to our panelists to talk about these issues.
Okay, well, I can get us started. Kristen, if you go to the next slide, because that's just going to be some visuals of what this could look like that might be useful tools. So some of my favorite tools to help support in the area of instruction and assessment. From the parent side of things, there's a website, and this is available, I believe, would be available within the link of everything that you'll be able to have access to. But the IRIS module has an entire module on, or IRIS Center has an entire module on parents and COVID-19. And it provides some really, really useful kind of family-friendly ways to wrap your head around what instruction even means for your kiddo and what that could look like and what are some good takeaways that parents could have for that. It covers reading, it covers math, and it covers social, emotional, and behavior. And there's also frequently asked questions from that parent perspective. And so within these slides, like that picture is actually hyperlinked where it, once these slides get shared, you'd be able to click that and then it would be able to take you to that. But I find that to be really helpful for parents who for the first time are having to kind of navigate that virtual learning side of things and really support your learner more than you would have in the past. On the left side of this slide, it's more from that teacher perspective. So I live in the world of reading, so unfortunately this is very reading focused, but my favorite tool from a reading perspective, if I'm trying to plan really intentional reading instruction using virtual tools, comes from the University of Florida Literacy Institute, UFly, and they have a parent hub, which gives a lot of useful resources for parents by student age with websites for activities to do if you are looking for those kinds of things. From the teacher side, they have a virtual learning hub with very specific lessons and very specific templates for instruction that are so useful. From things like that bottom left picture shows a soundboard where you can have your kiddos be building those letters by clicking on them. And it's a really great way to make the instruction more hands-on, even if you're within a Zoom screen. To a variety of other different PowerPoint examples that are templates you could use to help planning your instruction. So that's just kind of a real quick overview of my favorite tools that get at both instruction and then assessment and thinking about both the parent and teacher perspective.
Yeah, and I just want to, I'm also in the world of reading right there along with Sam. And one of the things that I really can't say enough about this UFly website. In fact, got a note from a teacher today that is using this with their kindergartners specifically for letter name recognition, and was able to engage families in that process as well because of the format, the virtual format in which most of the resources are readily available. Also, I think what's a great resource on this is also there are tools to create visual schedules, which I know speaks more to creating and crafting the learning environment. But as a parent, I have used many of the tools that UFly has prepared to create a visual schedule specifically for reading. I've actually used a lot of those to create visual schedules for my own children and to help support teachers to create visual schedules. So UFly is just it's really a resource among resources right now for teaching reading in a virtual environment. And so I think it is hyperlinked on the resource that we're going to be giving you later. But I'm sure Sam and I, if you want to reach out to us at any given point, we'd be happy to help support you, because it is a big resource and a growing resource. There's a lot packed in there.
I also just wanted to mention that I might put it in the chat, a link to a form that is part of this larger website. I'll put both links in the chat. It's a pretty simple form. It's called the Distant Learning Family Support Plan. And what I like about this is that together with your child's educational team, you can really think about what is it that you need during this highly unusual time? What types of supports would be most useful to not only your child, but also to you? And so you can work through that with the educational team. It also asks about what a typical day looks like in your home so that educators can understand that perspective. And what other types of supports and services might your child be receiving this time that may not be provided within the school environment typically. And there are some other questions that you would go through, but what's nice is this provides a great opportunity for you to collaborate with your child's educational team to really pinpoint what it is that you need at this time and what your child needs at this time. So hopefully that would be helpful to you. And of course, the other website where this form is posted offers a lot of really great tips for families and also for educators. So for the educators who are on this call with us today, I would encourage you to check that out too. A lot of great sources that are being compiled from folks internationally.
Awesome. I'd like to throw in some ideas from the previous slide, talking about communication and the expectations. So when I think about instruction and what is super important for educators, for parents, I think about both the communication and the expectations piece, because from a teacher perspective, I want to make sure that the families are supported for the students, and that the students have everything obviously that they need in order to complete the virtual learning. But we know that that's going to look different. So some things that we have to do are obviously communicate with the family, ask what are the current needs, but then provide things very simple things that we may not even think about, and as parents, you may not even think about asking for, but it's on this slide kind of with the words, but it's asking for a schedule, asking for maybe a copy of the lesson plans, asking for an overview of what is my child supposed to be learning, because a lot of times it is so overwhelming just to plan for that virtual learning and send that out, that we as a teacher, we may forget that, the perspective of a parent, that it may be overwhelming to you as well. So simply having that, maybe it's a cheat sheet, maybe it's just a simple schedule, like Monday to Friday, this is you're working on X, Y, and Z across the week, and those simple things are just so helpful. So from an educator perspective, providing that for students when they're on virtual learning, and then from a parent perspective, making sure that you request that so that you know where your child's supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing, because it just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and I would second what Ashley is saying. And there's a couple of things that I've done as a parent, having been an educator, to help in that process, to know where both of my children needed to be at whatever given point in the day. There's a couple of things that I've done. I've created a systems cheat sheet for myself. So Kristen, if you don't mind going back to that slide, thank you. This is where I compiled all of the information, feeling actually, this was not proactive. This was responsive. I was feeling incredibly overwhelmed after all of the communication that I was receiving from my children's schools, from both of their schools, all well-intended, well-meaning communication, but trying to sort through it and figure out, who do I need to contact when the Chromebook camera stops working on day 2, so that my middle school child does not lose his mind. And then who do I need to contact if, who do I need to contact at 9:30 if we can't get into a Zoom link, those sorts of things. And so I created sort of just cheat sheets, and I created copies and I'll drop them in. Feel free to take them and make them your own, but that's really what you see here in front of you is just compiling all that information that I was receiving from multiple spaces into one place so that I could have an at-a-glance document of knowing who to contact at what time, what Zoom link Davis needed to be in at what time, and then also which information sources I was receiving throughout the week and which ones were most immediate, and then which ones could I wait until maybe Friday evening to read or think about. And so I'll drop that in. And another thing that I did with my children, I think I noted that I have a 5th grader and an 8th grader, was we created checklists to incentivize their work, attending both their asynchronous work and attending their synchronous time and then completing their asynchronous work. And so here you can see the one that I did with my 8th grader, who has, since he was a little buddy, struggled with self-regulation. And when he's not super motivated by virtual learning, and sometimes just maybe wouldn't attend virtual learning. And with me also virtually teaching and my husband virtually teaching, we needed to create a system that was going to incentivize. And so creating just a checklist, and that checklist, he earns checks each day, and he is actually putting those checks. He and his brother have decided to put their checks together for a PS4. So we're just going to bring on some more technology in my house. But it's kind of those simple things, right? But putting them into checklists that work for us. And I mean, I even have brush teeth and deodorant, y'all. I mean, that's where we're at right now. So I will copy those and put them into the chat in case you're interested in making them your own.
Thank you for those awesome resources and sharing. We've got just over 15 minutes left, and since learning environment and social emotional supports was our 2nd highest rated area of interest, let's go ahead and stick with this slide and talk about some more of the supports, the schedules that we can put in place to help support children learning at home, the environmental supports that we can put in place, the tools that we can use.
Yeah, I think going back to, talking about keeping that school versus home sort of separated, I think that's important in terms of creating the space that they're going to work in. So that was one of the things that we did, was we said, okay, let's figure out what these spaces and give our boys some sort of input on how those things work. To chat with the teacher, I do remember that it's not really a beanbag chair. I don't know exactly how to describe it. It's maybe like one of those egg chairs that you sit back into. And that was Lincoln's, that's his favorite chair to read in. But then if he was reading and he was leading in a group, the teacher wasn't necessarily happy with the way that he was sort of relaxing in this chair on the Zoom. It didn't come off as, hey, this is what would be used in school. So we had to sort of separate that chair and go to, a comfortable chair, but not necessarily something that you would be lounging around in. So we did have to give them some input over creating their work spaces so that it was, because we all do that, right? Every one of us that works at the university, we have a certain way that we set up our office, and now, unfortunately, our home office. And so, we had to think about that. It's important that we don't necessarily decide everything about that space, that we give them some ownership over it.
And then on the side of kind of supporting that learner from a behavioral supports perspective, Erin had mentioned, visual schedules, which, if you're not familiar with that term, it's just a schedule you can see to have kids be able to know, I'm doing this, and then I'm doing that, and then I'm doing this. Like you can see at the top left, you could make a computer visual schedule. It really can be pretty simple. We see the self-monitoring checklist that Erin used. And then there's also this idea of having headphones to kind of create that environment even within the space. And I would say because we have some teachers on here as well, when I'm trying to teach or assess kiddos, those that have headphones, it helps you be able to hear them better, because sometimes it's really hard to hear if you're working with letter sounds and that's an unvoiced letter sound and that little kid is saying, it can be really hard to kind of hear that. And so creating systems that sort of support that learner to be able to focus in a little bit more, but then also can support your instruction, can really help. I think that headphones also helped within our work in a summer reading camp we did for kiddos to just kind of stay more focused. And so from a parent perspective, it could be a useful tool to have, to include, that would support your learner from just kind of those basic underlying behavioral supports that can set a kid up for success.
And just to piggyback off what Sam was saying, there's a picture here of a wireless mouse, which I know seems like really very simple, but one of the things that my middle school son, Will, requested was a wireless mouse because he had the school issued Chromebook, and navigating with that was actually quite difficult. And so that small little piece of technology, dare we call it assistive technology, has really opened up, it's made school learning a little bit more accessible for him, virtual learning. I would have never guessed that. So I'm glad I asked him, going back to Tom's point about including their voice and input in crafting the learning environment at home.
Something else I wanted to just mention is that many schools have established behavioral expectations that they teach and reinforce within the school building. And for some of those schools, they've adapted those expectations for the online learning environment. So just as an example, that at school, your child might be learning about what being respectful looks like. And maybe when they're in the classroom environment, that means you raise your hand before you speak. But this is going to look very different in the online learning environment. It might mean keeping your background noise to a minimum, which I did not model very well earlier with the dog barking. But I think it's important to remember that we should continue teaching those expectations, even if they might look slightly different in the online learning environment. So we pre-teach those expectations. We remind our students and children about those expectations and what they specifically look like in the online learning environment. And then most importantly, we're reinforcing or rewarding those expectations when they do happen. So I've got, I know you're probably overwhelmed with all the links, but there's so much good information to share. But I'm going to put another link in here that kind of walks you through what that could look like in the home environment. And even if your school did not have those established expectations prior to this transition to online learning, you could certainly develop with some of those expectations and what they look like in different environments within your home, within different routines, those sorts of things. So I'm going to put that in the chat box for you as well. So Cynthia's wondering, will the links be included in the email? That might be a question for you, Dr. Beach.
Yeah, so we do have, so in your, after the session, you'll get and actually I think at the end of the session, there's a QR code and perhaps a link to some additional resources. And some of these resources are on that list. But I guess what I'll ask the panelists to do is let me know if any resources that you shared tonight are not already on our resource list, and we can see about getting them added perhaps quickly before we send that out, or maybe in another round. But some of these are included and some may not be. You're welcome. I'll take this moment too, just to note that we do have 9 minutes left. And so perhaps something that one of the panelists said sparked a question for you, or you wanted to get some clarification or learn more about it. Perhaps you have other questions about learning environment or any other topic. So I do want to invite folks to enable your mic or write in the chat box and let us know what you're wondering about, what questions you have, or what you want to learn more about. So I'll give a couple of moments for people to write their thoughts.
Kristen, while we're waiting for that to come up, I'd definitely be remiss if I didn't bring up something that we talked about last week when we were planning this. Probably the parents that are in this panel, like myself and Erin, probably take for granted that we know how to use Canvas, for instance, or we know how to use Google Classroom. And one of the tips that I definitely want to share is getting to know the technology that the students have to use on a regular basis, making sure that you're taking advantage of the tutorials that maybe districts are sent out, or talking to your student and the teacher, finding out exactly how those things work. I know that I know how some of these things work, but sometimes I'm not sure about my child. And we did have a situation where the teacher was sharing a Google Doc that had the math work that they had to do, and the students were supposed to make a copy of said math problems to then turn in. But another student, when I went to check to see if my child had done the math was done, but when I checked where the edits came from, his edit, it was from another child. So that means there was another child or a parent that wasn't exactly sure how those tools were supposed to work, and therefore my son wasn't actually doing those math problems when I thought that he was, because it was somebody else's work. So I think it's really important to know how to navigate these learning management systems, as well as know the really important tools that the kids are using. I think most of the kids know how to use them. They're getting a lot of tutorials, but if we don't know and we're trying to get caught up with what they're doing, I know that can be definitely frustrating.
Thanks, Tom. And since I don't see any questions coming through the chat box, I think we can just spend the last couple of minutes going over our closing thoughts, letting everyone know that this is the resource here where you can get the list of resources, which contain many of the web links that were provided in the chat today and more for supporting your child's learning at home. And then also just some closing thoughts, and then I'll leave some time too just for our panelists to put additional closing thoughts to leave you all with. Remember that just virtual learning is new for everyone. So I think we've heard panelists today say, it's new for the teachers, it's new for the parents. It's okay to learn together and in collaboration with each other so that the child's need is met. And so the teachers and parents and families all feel honored, and the child as well, of course. To remember to prioritize based on shared understanding of what's most important. So this was not a tip that was shared directly, but that is in our slide deck. And the idea here is that there's a lot of information coming through when it comes to virtual learning. Our panelists mentioned communication from teachers and from the schools, navigating the learning system and assignments and expectations. And so to first develop a shared understanding of what the expectations are and what to prioritize, and then maybe using those checklists and those schedules to prioritize based on what's most important for your child's learning. And then to take advantage of supports as able and to ask for what you need. And so when you feel like you don't understand something or you want more information, to go ahead and take that step and ask about it. Because teachers are rich sources of knowledge and are willing to share with parents, and sometimes just might not know what the need is. And so it's important to ask. And then on the teacher side too, it's important to try and anticipate needs and understand the context of the families and provide the support as you understand it. So let me just pause here and invite the panelists to have any last or closing thoughts that you'd like to leave with the participants of our panel today. Or did I nail it?
I think you nailed it, Dr. Beach. But I would say, like hitting with number one, it really, virtual learning really is new for everybody, and it's a learning curve, and we just have to kind of work through it together, like from a parent perspective, from a teacher perspective, from people in higher education, everyone. So it's really okay. And sometimes we feel like we cannot ask questions, but it's really okay to ask questions, to say, I don't understand how this technology works. I didn't know that was due today. Or my child will not sit in front of the computer and the Zoom is not working. How else are we going to provide instruction? So just be, I would say, just be real about, how the virtual learning is really, really working. So.
Thanks for that addition. All right, so with that, I just want to let you know about our upcoming panels. On October 21st, we have the English Language Learner panel, and on the 28th, Early Childhood panel. And in November, there will be 2 panels led by our counseling department on mental health and wellness and self-care. And those dates will be are to be determined. But for registration, you can go to that link at the bottom of your screen, go.uncc.edu/FVLS. So thank you again for attending, and here is the contact information on the screen. We will hang around for the last 3 minutes in case audience members have lingering thoughts, but thank you so much, and a big thank you to the panelists for your expertise tonight, and to Misty for organizing our little unit here, and of course to the Alumni Association for sponsoring this event. It was a pleasure to be your moderator tonight.